Friends beyond the binary, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time for the podcaster who I'm looking at a button right now, and the button is an eye of an owl on a quilt that the listener sent me quite a few years ago. And I say, well, this owl has two button eyes and a nose made out of thread, which I guess is not as catchy as that Snow Person song about Frosty, which actually has nothing to do. That's just instant pointless meanders. They come right out of my brain, straight to my mouth. I don't know if they go through. There's a special part of my brain that has a drain that goes to my mouth. No filters. Well, there are some because I got to keep it sleepy. So if you're confused, you may be in the right place because it's time for Sleep With Me, the podcast that puts you to sleep. All right, everybody, Scoots here. This is episode 13 of Spice Friends. This is where we kind of look back at the episode and the ideas for it and maybe what's coming up next. Also, a little behind the scenes. I recorded 25 minutes of this already, but I didn't hit record, which hasn't happened in a while. The good news is that, I haven't watched the video yet, but I provided a video. I was doing an interview somewhere for Bloomberg for Henry, and who's a listener, which is cool. And I provided the video to Henry. So once it's released, then I'll release it on our Patreon and our Midnight Mission newsletter. So you can watch that for free. sleepwithmepodcast.com/midnight mission. And you'll see the moment I look down and realize it's not recording. And I may even have to delete it. I have no idea what I said. I know I was very unhappy. And that was just because I was out of my normal process. But watch that if you like it. If it would encourage you to support the show on Patreon, which is a huge thing, or to support our building hygiene kits for people experiencing homelessness. Let me know, by taking action, become a patron. Let me know you want more of that. And I could occasionally record intros or stuff like that. I can't record every recording just because it's, again, you'll see what happened. Too many moving parts. Also, I don't want to take away from any of the magic. So we're talking about Spice Friends episode 13, where it came from, how it came to be, what was it like, what did I think of the series, how did it turn out, all those things. And so it's interesting because this one really formed a lot different than other Sleep With Me series. In that, not like it, some things that became, I guess, an amalgamation is the right way to describe it, of different ideas I've had over the past 12 years, but so pre-sobriety, pre-podcast even. So these ideas, and I can picture where I was, different times, thinking about some of these original ideas that ended up becoming parts of Spice Friends. So let's talk about that, then we'll talk about the characters. So Genesis, or the log line, I don't know what the log line is. Spice Friends is a mashup of something like Care Bears, what's it, My Little Pony, Smurfs, and the famous Godzilla movies, which have been a huge influence in my life. And that's what got us there when I just said to myself, what if there was a world like the world of Godzilla movies, and there was a world with Care Bears, My Little Pony. What if those worlds, that was one world? That to me is where then I said, okay, yes. But it took a lot to get to that, to that what if. And there's kind of three pools of what ifs. And let's start with HBO. Let's start with HBO Max and Godzilla movies as a general thing. And so that was one idea. It was, I've always loved Godzilla movies. I used to watch them on WPIX as a kid. And they are an influence of Spice Friends. And Spice Friends is a parody of It's not a direct, it's not related to it in any other way other than influence and satire parody. So when I was a kid, I used to watch WPIX would have Godzilla movies, sometimes as marathons and sometimes just on an afternoon, just like afternoon serial. WPIX was a New York superstation, they called them. This is pre-WB and pre-UPN, which a lot of this isn't going to make sense to those of you younger in the audience, but... So whatever, Godzilla movies had a big place in my life. Now, once we entered the streaming era, or even the DVD era, I don't know what it was like on Netflix when you would order the DVDs. I never thought to say DVDs. And I know the Criterion Collection had a Godzilla collection. But at some point when HBO Max became was trying to go during the pandemic, I think, become one of the main streaming services, one of their big gets, in my opinion, was a majority, at least, of the Godzilla collection, especially the early era films. And so that was one of my things, like, especially I work a lot on Sunday, like on the podcast. Like Sunday is one of my biggest work days on the podcast. And I've thought about changing that, getting a life, those kind of things. But the reality is that on Sunday, my daughter's with her mom, and there's not a lot of email coming in or people that need to have a Zoom meeting or a phone call for the podcast. And so that means the day has a different rhythm to it. And there's something just about that it's a Sunday. Like I feel a little bit more relaxed. So it's just like it's not leisurely, but it's like it's a different kind of feel to the workday. And something I would never do, weirdly enough, I don't work from home every day anymore, but when I used to work from home every single day, I wouldn't do it during the week, but on Sunday I will usually play a Godzilla movie in the background once HBO Max had them while I was doing other work, mostly prepping release stuff, because there's a lot that goes into getting an episode ready to come out on Sunday that I do normally on Sunday. There's a lot of work that's got to go into the last stages of the podcast. And it always ends up, it's like day of kind of stuff. And if it's not day of, sometimes then, I don't know, it doesn't want to be, I don't want it to be part of my process. It's not like I'm going up to the last minute. But the times I get everything ready, I still need to double check everything at some point on Sunday to make sure everything's coming out the way it's supposed to and everything, all the stuff is correct. Because the reality is some people say, well, your standards are cis. It's there's a lot of commitments to be able for the podcast to exist and be sustainable and partners who are accountable for. And so making sure everything's in Sleep With Me listeners, the majority of them have very high standards. So double checking everything before it's released is an important part of it. But there's a lot that leads up to it. But it's like work. It's not rote work, but it is like, it's different than writing or something where I can kind of just be playing a Godzilla movie in the background. So I started doing that. And I said, I forgot how much I loved. There was a lot of Godzilla movies I hadn't seen. And I was struck by... and I don't know the eras. I'm not a Godzilla historian, but just the early eras of the films, how bonkers some of them are, and in a good way, in my opinion, in a good way. And how many plots, there's like a lot of times there's a love story plot, there's an espionage plot, there's like some other group that has resentment with Earth plots. Usually those they have interesting belief systems, and it really is interesting. And it's fun to watch. And I don't know, I really enjoy it. And you learn a lot about storytelling and going for it. And sometimes there's kids and I don't know, so I just really love Godzilla movies. And so I was watching them for pleasure mostly. I mean, maybe it's research to be like, could I ever do something with giant kaiju? But mostly it was just for fun. But, the question was already in my mind. And so I was watching those, working on the podcast. So it's one part. The second part was over the history. I don't know what year it was. I had even an intro about it. But I did have this idea of the Spice Friends, which is not what it ended up looking like. But I think it came from an intro where I talked about being a Spice Girl. I would be Cinnamon Spice, and like different like it's like, oh, could I do something like that? So again, it was another idea. Could we do something that's like the Care Bears or My Little Pony or something like that? The Smurfs would have been an earlier version. Because those are all like Huggy Bear or what, I don't know what the names are, like I don't know. I think there's like a rainbow Irish bear for the Care Bears. I don't know what that does. But there's like Rainy Day Bear or I don't know. I don't know any of those. Actually, I don't know anything. I mean, I watched some Care Bears, some of the newer ones. But it seemed like they were existing. Those ones that I watched were very similar to Smurfs in the sense of like, okay, so you have these bears and they have different antagonists. And each episode is somewhat of a procedural, like working against, whatever, something's going on. And the problem's got to be fixed. Or something like somebody's planning a birthday party for Foo Bear. And then ZZ Bear realizes that it's a 2-page invitation, but ZZ Bear only saw 1 page in the invitation and didn't think they were invited because it was an alphabetized invitation. So then ZZ Bear goes, whatever, and then the antagonist and something happens. And but it all works out in the end. And now in the one I was watching, there was never human beings involved. But for me, I was like, oh, would the Spice Friends be helping the humans? Would it be? Then I was like, I don't want to do Spice Girls because that already is a thing. So I don't know. I was like, okay, well, I don't know if that would work. And it just seemed too straightforward. Like, it's like, oh, we just do our own version of that. That's basically, I don't know if that has enough juice for me to work on it. Like just doing a reboot of or reimagining of something that already exists kind of feels flat to me. Too flat to put people to sleep or too flat to put in all the work it takes to make 12 episodes, which is a tremendous amount of, it's just a tremendous amount of stuff to make 12 episodes or even 10 or even 8. So I said, okay, well, I like that idea. Spice Friends, that's kind of catchy. There's a lot of spices. And yeah, like, and then I kept realizing that a lot of them, they exist in their own, like the Smurfs lived in the Smurfs world. I thought the Care Bears originally were supposed to come to Earth and help kids, but in the new, like I said, in the new Care Bears, they didn't. I can't remember. Gummy Bears was another one on Disney Channel or something, but I don't remember if they helped. I think that was a direct copy of Smurfs, but just smaller cast. And other than being called derpy, I don't really know anything and saying, oh, that's majority, that's my type. Like, even though people call me derp, like I said, derpy's my type. Like, that's all I know about My Little Pony, really. And so that's the limits of my knowledge is, so I said, okay, but I could do more research. Like I said, I watched some Care Bears. I think that was already, maybe that was when I was like, okay, so we're making Lady Witchbeard. I still didn't know what we were going to make next. And I'd had one or two other ideas. And I think I had one other one that I forgot, but I said, okay, well, none of those ideas are quite gelled yet. The other idea I had, it again was I still don't have a way to make it where it's like, okay, I'm just not feeling it. It's not a sleep with me thing. It's a different story. It's not a sleep with me story. And I do prefer the rhythm of second or third season, new series, second or third season. That's just a rhythm I like working with because it keeps creating new material, which is fun. And then we get to return to a series where, I have a relationship with the characters. Like the first season is kind of me getting to know the characters and their worlds and stuff like that. So whatever, I had that idea. So there's two things that this was closer to the release. So when I'm still writing Lady Witchbeard, those two things are happening in my mind in some place. but I don't have a development time because I'm working at, like, all my time's used by the podcast. So those are just ideas that I have written down. Okay, I don't know what to do, but we got to, okay. And it's also about trusting the process, which is never easy. I talk about in these episodes that something will come together and we'll get it done. Now, this third element of Spice Friends, which I would have had no idea sitting here in April of 2022, where we are, that like the pop culture part of it would have become it just in disbelief. And when you hear the history of it, you'll be in disbelief, I think, too. And it wasn't just one thing in 2022 that happened in March or April, but it was like different things over the past, including a number one hit, Meet Me at the Spot or whatever, which that song I love. And I think there's another hit right now, or I know there is. But so, okay, what was I saying? So, okay, so at some point well before Sleep With Me, again, I was a lover of Godzilla movies. I was a frustrated, like I was trying to write screenplays to break in, trying to write YouTube stuff to break in, whatever that means. Like, I don't even live in Hollywood. I didn't even, it was like more of like a hobby and wanting to make stuff. And I was trying, but I also had an alcohol problem or drinking problem, whatever you want to call it. And so I don't know how, like, it was somewhat delusional, but at least I was trying. And this is over whatever, in my 30s, I don't know. And one of the ideas I had in my, like, back then was, and this was before, I don't know, at some point I can remember pitching one guy and the idea to draw it for me. And he was not, or like, just didn't work out. But I had this idea, and I was going to write it, and then I was like, I'm just going to write it and release it, and I'm going to try to release it as like a free comic, because I knew it was like based on IP I didn't own, and like from a company that really goes after people. But I had this idea that I called President Will Smith versus Godzilla, which I'm just saying is an idea. I'm not saying it's anything to do with anything else. And the basic concept was that, like the original concept, which was different than what happened on Spice Friends, but not that different. And so this is like at least 10 to 12 years ago, probably maybe even 15 years ago. Probably at 15, I don't even know. But so I said, okay, so there's a world where Will Smith is president of the United States. I think even now you'd say, okay, I could believe it. Maybe now you'd say, I don't know, even like you say, okay, but 15 years ago, you'd say, okay, I'm with that. Like, seen him make speeches in those movies. You say, that was a Bill Pullman. I say, well, it should have been Will Smith then. No offense, Bill Pullman, but love you lots. But so I said, okay, so there's a world where President Will Smith, the actor, and Will Smith is playing a role where Will Smith, the actor, is president of the United States. So a little bit meta there. Now in Spice Friends, Willow Smith is vice president. In the book, or I mean, original idea, she was not. She was actually like an elite Marine, and. So just like, because she was part of the B plot in the comic book, and, but she still had a role. But so, like, basically the idea, which kind of played out, the comic was, the main points of the comic were, Will Smith was president of the United States. We'd had a time without Godzilla. Then Godzilla appeared. Again, I'm just telling a story, like, this is not I could always edit out and say a big lizard, big forest friend that was famous returned to the world or became out of, whatever. I mean, just like in the other movies now, they live on an island. I don't know. There's some sort of like it's a portal to another world, whatever it is. Godzilla comes out, or the big kaiju, and comes to the United States. Now, they already had a fail-safe plan in place. And unfortunately for President Smith, the kaiju lands in California, comes up on California, and President Smith's asked to make a split-second decision, which kind of similar to Spice Friends means that in order to save the rest of the United States, which is his role as president, or the majority of the United States and the world, he has to enact this plan, which, I mean, the Sleep With Me podcast, separates California and sends it off ideally with the kaiju into the big farm. Now, the underlying thing was that, only Willow, who was stationed somewhere being a Marine, everybody else was in California. So President Smith's having to make this decision that has emotional stakes. And so he has to make this decision, which is never, no one would want to make, whatever, but he has to. So, but it also becomes like a fuel for the story because now it's personal, right? And of course it doesn't work. I mean, part of it works, unfortunately, but Godzilla or the kaiju returns, later in the comic book. And then, of course, what happens is, and of course, that's the only reason it would make any sense anyway, because you see, you're president of the United States, you can't possibly do this. But they say, well, who else would? Is that there's some sort of, ray or serum that allows President Smith to turn into a giant kaiju. And in the movie, it would just be straight up one-on-one, and President Smith would win, but no longer be a human being, and probably go to Big Farm anyway, but, would be saving the world. And then the B plot was more like, while this is all happening, there's also a belief system based on the kaiju that's trying to take over stuff. So that's where Willow would be, is trying to take over I wanted something where they are trying to take over the White House. I don't know, Willow would have been in an action role. So that was the idea. It was just going to be a comic book for fun. And that I was going to put out for free, but I couldn't get I didn't have the emotional capacity to follow through on things or find a collaborator at the time. So that was an idea I just had, and I'd been in the back of my mind every once in a while. I'd think about it again. I'd say that's pretty cool. And again, pre-2022, you'd say, I could see that. I don't know. At least I can. And I say I think I would go to that movie. If it was done the right way, I mean, you say that's going to be tough, but I say, yeah, it would be tough. But I mean, I still think one of my peak of the last 4 or 5 years, I was in a movie theater watching Mission Impossible, whatever, and Tom Cruise is running in London or something at top speed for 15 minutes, sprinting. In the movie theater I was in, people, including me, were standing, cheering, we were laughing and cheering and loving it. It was just one of those movie experiences that was where you were giving, your suspension of your disbelief was full and you were immersed in the joy of, Tom Cruise running. I don't know if anybody had that experience. I don't even know which one. I mean, that was the one with the, Henry Cavill, whatever, the Superman guy. And I don't know. I mean, if you saw it, I don't know if you read, and I was at it was fairly packed, and I think it was a matinee on a weekday. But I'd say Will Smith as a kaiju against, that could be, if in the right hands, it could be possible. So I don't know. So those are the three ideas that ended up becoming Spice Friends. And what happened was, the what ifs just happened to overlap. I said, okay, what if the Spice Friends? No, not enough there. And then I kept watching these Godzilla movies. I said, well, could this be a sleep? No, how would that be a Sleep With Me? And let's see how it could ever work. And then at one point I said, what if the Care Bears were giant, and they were the ones going against the kaiju? And she said, those could be the Spice Friends. And I said, okay, I think I like that idea. I think that could be, you say, that's going to be a sleep with me idea. And I say, yeah, that I can see as a sleep with me episode. So then it was about brainstorming. Okay, what if, so I said, okay, let's do it. I can see that Spice Friends. Now, originally I didn't know what it was going to be called because I knew we couldn't use the word. I knew we couldn't, a lot of the words are some of those names are owned by companies. But the concept isn't of giant beings roaming the earth. So I said, okay, and then I said, okay, Spice Friends, and how do we get in? What's our in point, right? And I said, okay, well, that's where the comic book kind of helped me. Because he said, well, when do we get into this story? When do we join it? When do the Spice Friends join it? And that was like watching the Godzilla movies and realizing that, there's a lot of other plots, and none of them are super complex usually. And I don't think this ended up following an ordinary Godzilla plot. And I think originally I thought it would be a procedural, so I thought each episode would be a procedural where it's okay, we have a Spice Friend, we have a kaiju, and the procedural is finding the I thought that, but you can already hear my pausing and say, wait a second, where's the procedural? You have two beings, but what's the procedure? Who's going to win? What are the stakes? So that was one challenge that came up later. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but it was okay, what is the end of the story? Where are we starting? Why are we starting there? And that's where I kind of got to the point where I said, okay, well, what if we start? So we could start at okay, we got this. Okay, so maybe right after, because I had the comic book idea. I said, okay, I like that leadership. Now this is again, where it was still a non-challenging idea that President Smith and Vice President Smith would be running the country, or they would have had recently been running the country. That was the idea that I'd say 94% of Americans could be I'm down, count me in. They got my vote. So I said, okay, but it probably would be afterwards. And that gave us very similar to the comic book. I say, okay, now Vice President Smith and now President of the World Smith, she would have personal stakes, which would also be confusing. She has a need to heal, and her lack of healing is going to get in the way of her decision making. But it also makes her a character I want to get to know. She's obviously capable. She was vice president, then president, now president of the world. She's had this experience. She's a daughter. I have a daughter. So I don't know. That made me interested in her, and she's been through a lot. She's lived through this new era of kaiju. So I said, okay, and she's the leader we need, I think. And I think with these stories, for me, I don't know, I prefer, I guess, I fall into I don't need a perfect leader. I like to have a capable leader, like a Picard, a Riker, Janeway, Shellstrop, whatever it is, that's, I say, okay, I want a capable leader. Don't give me what's believable, give me what's relatable or whatever. I don't know what they say. I see that's someone I can relate to. I haven't been through what she's been through, but I can relate to that. And I said, okay, and that's a good starting point because we already have our world's already dealt with it. And then one of the things I liked about the Godzilla movies was that there was always this outside influence or inside the Earth or Atlantis. And I wanted to sleep with me, but I think sometimes in the movies you can't tell if they're an antagonist or good or what their intentions are. And I felt like that added a layer for me of suspense, but conflict that could be explored through the season. but also of like capability. Like how would we be, on Earth here, be capable of dealing with this? And I don't know, like otherworldliness. And also it just helps make it like, I don't know, just fit with like where I needed the story to be. Okay, so we're living in a world where it's calm now, but there's a ticking clock. I said, okay, so that's kind of where some of the ideas came from, I think, when I was trying to figure out how do we get into the story in a way like where we're joining it, the story starting at the right time for us to join the story. The story's been going on, but we're going into the story at the right time. And I said, okay, when the clock's about to run out. And then I also like, I don't know, just for me, these are just elements of stories I like, and that makes it easier for me to tell. I say, okay, so they're waiting. We have a capable leader waiting. She does not have all the information she needs. In fact, she has very little. She also has expectations, which I would say are relatable and realistic in a sense, or understandable expectations. Then answers coming from this other world that we're working with to put a stop to the kaiju. And then you have a figure coming in with the answer. And of course, you're going to say, okay, is it a serum? Is it a ray? Those are what you would expect from the movies. And that's where it fit in with, so that's all very kaiju story based. And this is where we go back to what makes a Sleep With Me story, or what makes a story sustainable for me to tell, is to have a turn. And for Sleep With Me stories, it's a turn into the story swamp and a bit of a morass. So you want more ass? You got it. You're in the right place. We got more ass for you here at Sleep With Me. More ass, whatever you say, wherever you say it. And I said, okay, so it could turn into story swamp there, because it would be too easy if someone came back and they said, okay, just take a cinnamon stick, put it in the serum, problem solved. That's not even how Godzilla movies work, which is frustrating in the modern era for people, or at least when I've seen the movies, even for me, say, well, when Godzilla didn't even start getting the movie till like 45 minutes in there. And I didn't even realize it till I had to do it myself, how that doesn't work. You can't have 2 hours of a giant being running around. It just gets, it's just not, I don't think you can, and have it be entertaining or sleepy. Because I don't know what episode that was, 2, 3, or 4, where I said, well, holy cow. So I'll get into that maybe. But so you have a capable leader. She's waiting for this astronaut to return. The astronaut and the planet have set up a lot of stuff that didn't make a lot of sense. But of course you're going to go with it. So they have all this children's programming. And I don't know, I just like this in a sense of like it's, what's the word? Like countercultural, or I don't know, there's another word for it. But the idea of like saving the world through children's programming, like that. And I don't know if we were able to fully deliver on this concept, because the story just went like it just became a matter of those two characters were too powerful that they kind of took over the story. I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing. But the story just ended up going with them, which happens a lot with these twofers. And I didn't want to make it so, I don't know, because of all the things, this is wild to say, but it was like a very grounded story in those two characters. So as surreal as some of the stuff that happened was, it had to have an element of groundedness where something else, or I don't know, that's just where I'm trying to detach in the next series from that limitation and move into, stay in a surreal place where anything can happen. But for as wild as Spice Friends was, like there was a lot of underlying rules, which may or may not be apparent, understandably. But so they're waiting for this savior type figure to come with all the answers. Also, I was able to pay off how I wanted to pay it off later with the astronaut's backstory. don't think I even knew that at the time. But so the astronaut arrives and says, oh, yeah, here's how we fix it, is through children's programming, teaching children to express themselves through the joy of song and dance. And they say, what do you mean? I do want to jump to the underlying historical significance of these kaiju. And their significance in the story was that they appeared, and people thought their appearance related to fission or fusion used in an offensive way. But really, I mean, if their myth and in Spice Friends was that, no, it's tied to the emotions of that, not the history or the existence of fission or fusion used in an offensive way. But our deep, deep, deep-seated feelings about that, because that's just my generation, whatever. Like, I grew up in, or, I was like, I guess, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And, as things went from the Soviet Union to Soviet Republic, where, during the Cold War, where they said, oh, boy, this is how much stuff we all have, and so, that's something you deeply repress, or you just use cognitive dissonance to escape from and say, oh, yeah, it doesn't make a difference. But there's got to be, I mean, come on, we're not going to, Freud, we don't need Freud or Jung over here to say, okay, there's got to be some cost to that. And maybe it's costs we all share. But in Space Friends, the cost is that these beings exist. They're manifestation, or they feed on our feelings about that. Like it can't hide from those feelings in the story. And also that there's this obscure idea of manifestation, but it's not that different than portaling, right? Because or whatever is I think in one movie it's like, oh no, they come through a whole portal at the bottom of the sea. So again, it was I don't know, the idea that they already exist or something. I don't know. But I think that made it less a capable leader. Is just your manifestation theory that's made up. It doesn't even make any sense. And then somehow I'm trying to explain it. But then that it works, but it only works the real trick is that it only works if you're in the process of expressing true feelings, because that's what makes the kaiju appear, is when you're in the process of repressing true feelings. So it's just a flip side of the coin. If you're expressing your real feelings through the process of song and dance, you could get the Spice Friends to come. But it's just such an easy thing to forget. I mean, and again, a lot of this just is about me. I can only write from where I am. So it's just ideas that I'm thinking about or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, so it's a process. But it's a process I'm going to forget about tomorrow, and then I'll reluctantly be like, you got to be kidding me. I got to do this again to express myself or get in touch with my feelings or journal or meditate. I don't want to. That's annoying. And so I guess each episode, instead of being a procedural, was almost every episode was some aspect of someone or some process getting in the way of the process, or a need for the results most of the time. A need for results getting in the way of that. This is a process-based thing. If you want the Spice Friends, you can't just get the Spice Friends. And then also all these unintended consequences and all these collisions of humanity, or later on, Ziparians, just being natural, real, geez, well, how do we behave? Again, another process-based thing, imperfectly. And so a lot of story complications just came from people being people, or leaders being leaders, or these things that keep occurring throughout history. And I think that was able to be fun, because otherwise, the problem with a capable leader is that as she becomes more and more capable, and then as she developed a kind of working relationship with the astronaut, was that then the story becomes too boring again. If each episode she became more and more capable, she would have had stuff solved by episode 4 or 5. Oh, and that goes into the kind of thing of the procedural. So I had a procedural one. I don't know which episode it was. Maybe it was a Cinnamon Spice one, where I was like, okay, I thought the cinnamon spice dance off would take like somewhere between 12 and 22 minutes. And so in the writing, I had that much set aside for it and not written. So whatever I had, like 22 minutes, no, yeah, I had 22 minutes written and then another 8 minutes after, which is 30 minutes. And I need 50 to 60 recorded to get what I need for the episode, not counting the intro. This is just the episode portion. So I said, so when I got into that dance-off part, it took literally 3 minutes, even with different things happening, at least in my mind. I don't know how long it took on tape, but I said, okay, this is a big, big mess because still need another 19 more minutes that I don't have written. So I think whatever. Luckily, the characters were strong, so I was able to figure out, I don't even remember what happened there, but so I don't know. So that was another thing with the procedural. I said, okay, well, the procedure can't just be every episode. That's what I thought once I was working initially. I said, okay, each episode will just be what spice friend, what emotion. I had like the wheels of emotion. What emotion? Because that would be very procedural, like Care Bears. Here's the problem. It's caused by this, either ignoring this feeling or not enough of this feeling. 1, 2, 3, and then we find this feeling, or we strengthen this feeling, or face this feeling, or express it, and then the spice friend solves the big one. Problem is that's like too efficient. That might be good for like an 18 or 12-minute Care Bears episode if there's 2 for an hour, or whatever, 11 minutes, that works. Plus they have like a minute and a half to start and finish. So 19 minutes, that makes sense for a Care Bear, but it's not going to work for a 50-minute Sleep With Me episode. And like efficient stuff and capable leaders, make for less meanders. Because if it's a perfect leader, then they're just going to make the perfect decision. Or if it's like a capable leader in controlled circumstances without chaos, then she's going to make a decision. She knows how it's going to turn out. Or she knows she can focus on the process and then it'll turn out. But again, I think like a lot of what I wanted to relate to with President of the World Smith was that is she still experiencing her feelings from earlier and her father and these big beings. And also not just the hard feelings, but also like her own self-image of her father's heroism. That could be very enticing for a lot of people to be like, well, I need to live up to that image, or I want to because it makes me feel something inside. And maybe that's what my purpose is to kind of do the same thing my father did. And one day I'll have that opportunity and then that'll complete my journey here. I mean, because at least for me, these are the kind of, not the exact same things I get caught up in, but delusion is a way I live my life. I mean, it's just a part of my normal existence. Cognitive dissonance, delusion, forgetting, all those things. Like, if it was just as easy as I guess I would never expressing my feelings through the joyous song and dance. But I thought that it would be that easy for the season. And at least initially, I wanted an astronaut. I don't know. I liked also the conflict. It's like, this is never going to work. This idea is ridiculous. But at the same time, it's one of the only ideas we have. We need this to work now. And then there was also the thing of like toning down stuff. But also still having the kaiju have all the powers they have. But a lot of times giving the... relating the stakes more to the actions of human beings or Ziparians versus the big ones, but also saying like, well, what would we do? What would it be like in a world where these big ones run around? If it was a real world, not a fictional world. I don't know, as fictional as my worlds are, I say, what would it be like if it happened today, here, and then 10 years from now we still had them? What would our world be like? Really, not in idealized fiction. Say, that's interesting. I don't know. At least that's interesting to me. So then I was like, okay. I don't know. So then I just got to like, so then things just kept turning away, but then some stuff became obvious, right? Like that, a lot of times, especially in Sleep With Me stories, the capable leader's leadership is rejected because they're asking us to set aside something, and we don't want to set aside it. Like at least that, and that's my experience with my own life. Or we have our other underlying values or stuff is, say, no, I'm not into that. I don't want to take on that. I'd prefer to have like a soda and go to bed. So so that stuff was going on. And then, kind of just went from there. Wasn't what I expected, but it ended up more and more that the president and Astro, they kind of took the show that it never really settled on the self-awareness and intelligence of the Spice Friends or the Kaiju until later, that it was like, that maybe it was just like like that they were self-aware and they did have consciousness. It's just like impossible for them to communicate with us because we, I don't know, that there was also that barrier. And then Zipper was really like something taken from some of those movies that I saw. It's like, okay, here's this other world. They're totally different than us. But at the same time, they have feelings. But they also have stakes, and they have stakes dealing with the kaiju. And then, did their idea of like being like Earth focused, kind of answered some questions that I kind of felt like were some gaps in the story. Maybe there was a little bit of the dome, the like end of the movie. I didn't see the TV miniseries, but the book, The Dome, in there, but a little bit different because I think those felt like teenagers in the dome. And I don't know, like I was curious about Zipper, but I didn't fully like that wasn't a main character in the story. It was a main device and influence. But like I wanted the Zipper to be just otherworldly enough to not be totally relatable or understandable. And then finally we headed towards the finish line where it's like, okay, I knew for the finish line I wanted a third world where the Spice Friends would exist and the big ones. But that they would come to Earth. I don't know if I'm spoiling that, but like if there was other series that then it like explains the Care Bears or the Smurfs and My Little Pony. Like that was like, if I just did the Spice Friends now, it'd make sense. Because like, where the heck are they coming from? Like, why would they come to Earth? But then I was like, oh, wait a second. Like where the story ended up like with about emotions and feelings, that's where the pen pal idea came in. And the clouded delusion, kind of like, it's like, okay, this is like taking place in a Sleep With Me world, probably earlier timeline of the same world, like a lot of the Sleep With Me, like it's like a version of our world. Like, and I said, okay, yeah, that all fits. But I wanted them to have their own world, but I still want them to be a part of our world. I don't know. And then I wanted stuff to work out for Zipper, but I definitely wanted like, and maybe it got repetitive, I'm not sure. But like when you're process-based and you're looking for results, it can be repetitive of like, okay, we can't work together. I definitely wanted the idea that like we could have solved things, but there's no way we're going to compromise. And I relate to it. I don't think I'm not being judgmental about Earth, but it's like, we're not going to give up this sacrifice for another planet. Like if some other planet was like, hey, we'll work stuff out with you if you never eat oatmeal again, your whole world, you got to stop growing it, stop eating it, no more oatmeal for Earth, and that's our compromise with you. And then we won't build a freeway through Earth or whatever. Like Earth would be, I mean, I think I would probably agree. I'd be like, no way, like work out another solution then. And they'd be like, no, that's the only solution. Every Earthling has to agree to never eat oatmeal, never store it, whatever, thirst for it. Be like, well, that's you're asking something impossible. You must not know Earthlings then. Because we might do it, but we're never going to forget about it. So at some point we're going to find a way to get you back for making us give up oatmeal. And I mean, a reasonable person might say, it's just oatmeal. You say, for you, but for me, it's symbolic of us giving up too much to this planet. That why you got to build a freeway here anyway? Why don't you leave us in our oatmeal alone? And so that's kind of like one of the cruxes of us trying to work stuff out with Zipper. I mean, it was a little bit less, they needed us in an unhealthy way, but they also had more power than we had. And we were having trouble listening to the president and Astro. But I think it was like the cool thing was when you get like when there's that many weird stuff, like there's that many rules, like if I give up too many rules and get away from the procedural, like find all these inefficiencies, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what I'm good at is finding inefficiencies in storytelling. Then the inefficiencies and the relatability, like I can focus on that stuff and it creates more problems for me to solve, which creates more meanders, which creates a better bedtime story. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the feedback I got and, I mean, other than a couple people that were too focused on the Kaiju, was that this was, because basically it was a story about these two people trying to work together in leadership roles and solve stuff. And I mean, a couple of episodes were about their own personal journeys too. I don't know. I don't know. I had fun and I really appreciate being able to tell these kind of stories. I'm looking forward to the next series we're going to do, which will be a return, season 3, that I've been working on for a little while. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for listening to the show and good night. All right. I want to thank everybody that signed up for our newsletter to help people experiencing homelessness. I really, really appreciate you doing that. It's a free newsletter. Sign up at sleepwithmepodcast.com/rebel news. It really, really means so much to me that people are participating. And that's all you need to do right now is just sign up for that newsletter. And so, yeah, I want to thank the people that signed up recently. Philip, Cole, and Susan, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Lee, Johnny, and Abena, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Sean, Catherine, and John, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Ada, Emma, and Stephen, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Kimmy, Penny, and Steve, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Ann, Humphrey, and Amy, thank you. Thanks, and good night. Cheryl, Greg, and Anna, thank you, thanks, and good night. Angela, Karen, and Anna, thank you, thanks, and good night. Kelsey, Stephen, and Vita, thank you, thanks, and good night. Jeff, Merritt, and Jody, thank you, thanks, and good night. And Heather, Elizabeth, and Alsace, thank you, thanks, and good night. Oh, and Teal, Jaden, and Lynn, thank you, thanks, and good night. Sherry, Haley, and MLN, thank you, thanks, and good night. Joni, Ginger, and Rochelle, thanks, and good night, everybody, for signing up. Could not do it without you supporting me and working with me to help other people. Really, that's what the podcast is here for, too. So thanks for being a part of it during the daytime. I really appreciate it. And the Sleep With Me would only be here if it wasn't for the people that support the show directly on Patreon and support our sponsors. So thanks to those people. And yeah, if you want to join us, sleepwithmepodcast.com/rebel news. Thanks, and good night. And here's a Tuck You In sponsor that's enabled us to grow all those extra episodes in the feed. Thanks and good night.